You ever wonder why so many countryside towns just vanish? Why houses rot in silence and stories get buried beneath weeds and dust? Tonight, we're diving into 3 terrifying encounters from the most isolated corners of the countryside, where something old still lingers and waits to be seen. It was the kind of countryside where silence pressed down like a weight, where even the birds seemed to think twice before breaking the quiet. Withers Hollow wasn't a place that showed up on maps anymore. Not since the last of its residents moved out in the late 80s. The land had long since reclaimed what little remained. Collapsed barns overtaken by weeds, rusting farm equipment half buried in tall grass, and a winding dirt road that disappeared into the trees like it didn't want to be found again. Mara didn't believe in ghost stories. She was a photographer, the kind who hunted the forgotten and decayed for beauty. Old towns, desolate barns, the empty bones of buildings left behind by time. Those were her muses. When she'd heard about Withers Hollow from an old woman at a flea market, she was instantly intrigued. The woman had whispered the name like it was a curse and warned Mara not to go there alone. Of course, that only made her more determined. She arrived just before dusk, parking her Jeep at the edge of the treeline. Her GPS had cut out 20 minutes earlier, and there was no signal, but she had a topographic map she'd printed just in case. The trees loomed tall and skeletal in early spring, and as she walked, her boots crunched against a mix of dead leaves and gravel. It was an hour's hike to what was once the center of the hollow. The light was fading, casting long shadows through the empty windows of a half-collapsed farmhouse. She took out her camera and began to shoot. Broken windows, moss-covered walls, an old rocking chair tipped over on a sagging porch. There was a somber poetry in it all. And then she saw it. At first, she thought it was just the reflection of light, or maybe dust in the lens, but standing at the edge of the woods was a faint flicker. A lantern. She lowered the camera slowly. The light bobbed up and down like it was being carried. It was too steady to be a trick of the light. Mara blinked. It was gone. She shook her head and turned back toward the house. Probably just the setting sun hitting something metallic. She had one more shot in mind. The back side of the house, where a rusted water pump leaned like it was sighing under the weight of years. She moved behind the structure and crouched slightly, framing her shot. There it was again, closer this time. The lantern glow flickered softly from just beyond the tree line. It hovered, moved slightly to the left, then stopped. Her heart began to pound. Not with fear, not yet, but with curiosity. She slowly stood up and raised her camera to take a shot. Nothing. No glow, no figure. Just shadows. Then came the sound. A low crunch. Footsteps. Not hers. She spun around, but there was nothing there. No person, no animal. Just the wind playing with the brittle stalks of dead grass. That's when she noticed something odd. The air was heavy, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in just a few seconds. Her breath came out in a small puff, even though it was supposed to be a mild spring evening. And the silence, that suffocating, unnatural silence. She heard it again, the soft crunch of footfalls on dry earth. But this time it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, approaching. Mara backed away toward the house. Her instincts were finally catching up to what her eyes had been denying. She whispered, "Hello," and hated the way her voice sounded. Small, trembling, like it didn't belong to her anymore. No response, but the lantern returned. This time it was unmistakable. The soft golden glow lit up the side of a nearby tree, and standing just behind it was something. She couldn't make out its features, just a dark shape holding a light, standing perfectly still, watching. Her camera hung uselessly from her neck. She tried to lift it, but her hands refused to work. Then the figure took a step forward, and another. The light didn't sway like it should have, pulsed like a living thing. That's when she ran. The sprint back to her Jeep felt like a nightmare. No matter how fast she moved, the trees all looked the same. The path was gone. Her breath rasped in her throat. Behind her, the footsteps came faster. Crunch, crunch, crunch. She dared a glance back. The lantern was floating now. No one held it. It glided behind her, slowly gaining, no matter how much she pushed her legs. Then the light disappeared again. Everything stopped. Mara stumbled out of the trees into the clearing where her jeep was parked. She fumbled with the keys and dove inside, locking the doors with trembling fingers. Silence. She stared out the windshield, trying to convince herself she'd imagined everything. But there it was again, on the edge of the woods, the faint glow of the lantern. It didn't move this time, just hovered. She turned the key. The engine sputtered. Again. Caught. She hit the gas and tore down the dirt road, her eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The lantern stayed where it was, but just before the trees swallowed it from view, she thought she saw something new. A face, pale, almost skeletal, with eyes like hollow sockets, staring straight into her. Mara never returned to Withers Hollow, but the pictures she took that night, some were blurred, some completely black. But one showed the front of the house, the porch, and in the far left corner, almost obscured by shadow, a man, tall, thin, in old-fashioned clothes, holding a lantern. Harlan Peak was never supposed to be a place people lived. It was too far from the nearest town, too cold for crops, and too quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. But in the late 1950s, a group of Mennonite families built a settlement there, sturdy homes, a chapel, a schoolhouse. They lasted all of 7 years before abandoning the entire area. No one really knew why. No war, no famine. They just left all at once. One of the houses still had food on the table when investigators arrived. In 2016, Nate and Olivia, a couple from Boise, were looking for an off-grid property to turn into a rustic homestead retreat. Nate found Harlan Peak on a survivalist forum. 500 acres of land for cheap, an old barn still standing, and a log house that just needed work. The original listing was removed from every real estate site within a week. But Nate had saved the contact info. They made the drive in November, thinking they'd spend the weekend surveying the place and camping overnight in the old house. It was a 7-hour drive, the last 2 on rough, snow-covered back roads that cut through endless stretches of pine. When they reached the property, the air felt heavier, as if it had snowed there longer, colder. The house was in better shape than expected. The front door hung slightly off its hinges, but the interior was solid, dry. A fireplace still stuffed with old ash. In the corner of the main room, Olivia found a faded family photo nailed to the wall. It showed a group of people, probably the last family to live there, posed on the porch. They weren't smiling. They set up camp inside the living room. Sleeping bags, battery lamps, a propane stove. That night, the wind picked up hard. Nate swore he heard tapping upstairs. A tree branch, maybe. Olivia told him not to be paranoid. But the tapping didn't stop. It had a rhythm to it, like a knock, slow and deliberate. It would pause, then come again. At midnight, Nate went to check. The upstairs hallway was narrow, the floorboards bowed inward. He opened the door to the master bedroom. Nothing. The window was intact, no trees brushing against it. He was about to turn back when he noticed something strange. A chair in the far corner of the room. A single wooden chair, facing the wall. He didn't remember seeing it earlier. He stepped closer. There were markings on the wall above it, faint, scratched into the wood. Words. He leaned in and brushed his glove over the surface. It said, "We stay quiet and they pass." Nate stood there, heart pounding, and suddenly became aware of how cold the room was. Not just chilly, freezing. He could see his breath in the air. He stepped back, and the floor creaked, louder than it should have. The sound echoed through the hall like it was mimicking him. He went downstairs, trying not to show Olivia he was spooked. At around 3 a.m., they both woke up at the same time. Something had slammed against the front door. Hard. Then again. Boom. Boom. The hinges rattled. Olivia grabbed Nate's arm. They stayed silent, barely breathing. Nate reached for the axe they'd brought, but neither moved. The door stopped shaking. They waited, listening. Then came the footsteps across the porch, wood creaking under slow, heavy steps. Then silence. Then, the front door creaked open. Nate stood and pointed the flashlight toward it. No one there. But the wind didn't blow the door open. It had a heavy latch and there was no wind. Not anymore. The flashlight beam caught something on the ground just outside. Footprints. Barefoot. Human. Heading into the house. The beam flickered, and Olivia screamed. Behind Nate, in the hallway leading toward the back rooms, something moved. A shadow. Fast. They didn't wait. They bolted for the truck, barefoot in the snow, keys in Nate's shaking hand. As they drove away, the headlights swept over the front of the house. There was someone standing at the upstairs window, watching. A man, shirtless, pale skin like wax, face pressed against the glass, mouth wide open. But the most horrifying detail wasn't the face. It was what was behind him. A dozen more faces. Children. All pale. All watching. None blinking. When Nate told the story later, he said the thing that stuck with him most was the silence. Not even a scream, not a cry. Just staring. Frozen. They never went back. Nate tried to find the forum where he first saw the listing, but it was gone. Wiped. Like it had never existed. A year later, another family attempted to purchase Harlan Peak. Their paperwork was rejected by the county. The note attached simply said, "Condemned. Unsafe for habitation. Do not disturb the quiet." 6 months after Nate and Olivia fled Harlan Peak, a low-traffic YouTube video quietly appeared online titled, "Exploring a Forgotten Mennonite Town, We Found Something." The video was only live for 4 hours. Those who saw it remembered it clearly. The footage wasn't flashy or dramatized. It was raw, unnerving, the kind of thing that didn't need editing to make your skin crawl. It was filmed by 2 brothers from Missoula, Casey and Grant, who specialized in urban exploration, mostly abandoned barns and grain silos. But Harlan Peak was different. They found it through a cached web archive of old land plots. No one they asked in town had heard of it. That only made them more determined. Their first sign something was off came long before they reached the property. It was midsummer, yet frost clung to the road shoulders, thick and white like early March. As they drove, their car's internal thermometer dropped by 8 degrees over a quarter mile. They documented everything, narrating with the usual goofiness you expect from small creators trying to stay lighthearted. But their laughter stopped when they reached the settlement. It wasn't just that the house was in better shape than expected. It was that it looked lived in. The front door had fresh scuff marks. The snow around the porch was lightly trampled, as if someone had just left it. Inside, there were signs of recent activity. Logs stacked by the fireplace, a half-burned candle on the windowsill, and something strange, multiple wooden chairs. In every room, all facing walls. The same walls were scratched with faint messages. Most were unreadable, but one stuck out. "Don't answer the door after the knock stops." They joked about it on camera, nervously, played it off as part of the charm. But their voices grew quieter as they moved deeper into the house. Even through the screen, viewers could feel the atmosphere shift. The audio began picking up strange interference. Clicks, pops. One viewer, a former audio engineer, swore she could hear whispering layered in the background, like it was embedded in the silence itself. At one point, Grant found a small wooden door in the kitchen floor, root cellar access. He opened it and stuck the camera down. The footage froze for 2 frames, then cut. When it came back, the brothers were standing outside, visibly shaken. Casey kept looking over his shoulder like he expected something to follow them out. Then came the sound. They left the camera running while they packed up their gear. Off in the distance, barely audible, the mic picked up a knocking. Far away at first, then closer, closer, then silence. Grant muttered something, "Don't answer," when it stops. The camera spun suddenly. Casey had turned toward the house again. The front door was open. Neither of them had touched it. There was a figure standing inside. It wasn't clear, blurred by the low light, but viewers described it the same way later: tall, lean, unmoving, mouth wide open, just like Nate and Olivia described. The video cut out shortly after that. When people tried to refresh the link, the video was gone. So was the channel. Deleted without explanation. Emails bounced back. Socials scrubbed. Someone on Reddit claimed they found a cached copy and uploaded it to a file-sharing site. But within hours, that link was dead too, replaced with a 403 error. A few screenshots remain, posted in paranormal forums, but skeptics call them fakes. Then came the final twist. A local Montana newspaper ran a tiny article 2 months later. Brothers missing after hiking trip, vehicle found near Harland Peak. Search parties scoured the woods for 5 days. They found nothing. No bodies. No gear. Just their car, locked and parked on the edge of the trail. Inside were their cameras, all wiped, except for one single image. The last picture stored on the card showed the house, taken from inside, looking out through the front door. At least 10 pale figures stood in the snow beyond the porch, all facing inward, waiting. One of them was a man with an axe mid-step, and behind them, crouched on the roof, something bigger, bent forward like an animal, watching them. His face was not human. There's a stretch of land in Northumberland known to locals as the Hollow Field. It doesn't show up on Google Maps. You can see it from satellite view, a flat, gray patch between dense hills. But there's no label, no road leading in, and no formal name. Local folklore says the field was once the site of an early Saxon chapel that was swallowed by the earth. No structure remains, only the ruins of a low stone wall, encircling a patch of grass that never grows more than a few inches tall. Farmers won't go near it. Even the sheep avoid it. But in 2021, a university anthropology student named Kayla decided to investigate. She'd been writing a dissertation on forgotten English folklore, and the Hollow Field came up repeatedly in interviews, always whispered, always avoided. The stories shared one thing in common. People went in, but not everyone came out the same. Kayla contacted a distant cousin who owned land nearby and received permission to camp in the area for 3 nights. She brought a drone, 2 trail cameras, and a 360-degree field mic to document the area. She wasn't expecting anything supernatural. Her goal was to document the folk tales, examine the field, and record ambient night audio. She made it through 2 nights. The recordings from those nights still exist, and they're deeply unsettling. On the first day, she walked the perimeter. Her notes mention the strange layout of the ruined wall. It wasn't circular. It wasn't square. It formed a spiral, a crude, broken spiral of stone. Some of the rocks had ancient carvings. Runes, she guessed, eroded beyond recognition. That night, her 360 mic picked up chanting. Not clearly, just a low hum, rhythmic, cycling over and over. Kayla's tent footage shows her waking around 2:17 a.m., sitting up suddenly, wide-eyed. She doesn't say anything, just stares at the tent wall, as if she heard something no mic could capture. In the morning, her drone footage showed a strange disturbance in the field. Her tent had been surrounded by circular patterns in the grass, flattened and intertwined like crop circles. But there was no wind that night, and no one around for miles. The second night was colder. She set the trail cams further out, trying to capture wildlife or vandals if it came to that. Instead, at 3:09 a.m., one of the trail cams recorded a figure. It wasn't walking. It was sliding across the grass, arms at its sides. No footsteps, no motion in its legs, just gliding across the clearing, directly toward Kayla's tent. The frame glitches right as it nears the edge of the shot. The next frame shows nothing. The field is empty. The final 5 seconds of that clip are completely silent until a sound cuts in. Clicking noise. Rapid. Uneven. Then a voice, Kayla's voice, whispering something unintelligible. Except she was asleep at that moment. Or at least, she should have been. Her field mic from inside the tent picked up something horrifying. First, her own breathing, steady, rhythmic. Then, a new sound. Breathing. But not hers. Wheezing. Wet. Too close to the mic, as if someone or something was leaning over her in the dark. Then came the whisper. A voice not hers. Lie still. Lie still. They can't see you if you lie still. The next morning, her journal notes were frantic. Scribbled. Incoherent. Phrases like, the spiral is a door, and they don't like being seen. She drew a map of the field, but added a second spiral overlaying the ruins, one that went beneath. She didn't stay for the third night. She was found by a shepherd the next day, 2 miles from her camp, barefoot, walking in circles near a dried-out creek. She couldn't speak for hours. When she finally did, all she said was, "The field isn't empty. It's listening." Kayla recovered physically, but dropped out of her program weeks later. She won't talk about what happened. Her family says she still sleepwalks. Sometimes they find her standing outside in the yard, facing north, whispering something in Old English. And her gear? Most of it was recovered, except the field mic. It was found months later by another hiker, sitting upright in the middle of the hollow field, still recording, battery long dead. But when they recovered the SD card, they found one final clip unmarked. It was 3 minutes of silence. Then, at the very end, a voice, hoarse, inhuman, studio microphone. "If you made it this far, you might want to leave a light on tonight. If these stories chilled you, like the video, subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss what creeps in next. And if you have a true story from the forgotten corners of the world, drop it in the comments. We're always listening." This was Forgotten Screams. And some echoes never fade. She lied. We see you when you lie still.